Hey, Brandon.
Hi there, Dottie. How's it going today?
It's going well, thank you. How are you?
Doing all right.
Good to hear.
See, things look like they've been busy on the notation side lately.
Always.
Ooh.
Hello.
Hey, Jason.
James, I want to check in with you. Were you the one that had the runtime spec question?
Yes.
I wonder if we want to do the same thing we've done before, which is kind of pull that one to the front of our agenda. Does that sound good to others here?
I think that's fair.
So, James, the reason I do that, done it a few times before. We've got a few people from the runtime spec here, but I think a lot of what happens on their side, they do a lot more over on the GitHub, getting issues and pull requests. I'm kind of surprised. How long has that one been open? Oh, just yesterday. Okay.
Yeah. I just opened it yesterday, and someone from my team said there was a meeting today, so thought bring it up.
Yeah, that doesn't hurt to chime in. We appreciate everybody that wants to stop by and visit. I suspect I don't want to put words into the runtime spec maintainers' mouths, so they should go ahead and chime in now. But my guess is that opening up a pull request over there will probably be a good way forward on that one. I'm not sure. Tianan, are you a maintainer, or Phil? I'm not sure.
I am not. I think Tion might be.
Depends on why you're asking.
The
Yes, I am.
the runtime spec issue 1185 James has on our agenda to talk about an issue with the layout folder when it's on Windows. And James, as I looked through this, did you have a specific change there that you were thinking of?
I guess it would be to remove the limit of, or the minimum items of 1, and make it so that it's an either empty list or null. I don't know exactly which one is more appropriate there. I guess the problem, and maybe the reason it wasn't caught initially, was because of Go's serialization. If you create a new object, it serializes as null, and then when it reserializes, it comes back. And so, but when I was doing it in Rust, it caught it because the Rust OCI spec has a check to make sure that there's at least a list there, and not null.
And is there a concept of like the current directory or anything like that?
Not in this particular part of the spec, I believe.
Yeah, this would be a good one for the runtime spec maintainers to chime in on. And like I say, we've only got one here, and
Okay.
TNR is being a little quiet right now.
If the
my-
next step would be to open up a PR, that would
Yeah.
make it a little bit more.
Yeah, that would probably be the next piece on this. But like I say, since you only opened it yesterday, they tend to be pretty active over on their GitHub repo. That's
Okay.
their way of going back and forth. So that's why I like to pull these requests early, just to get them before you sit through an hour of us going back and forth on the same thing we go back and forth on every week. I was like, let's get you an answer to this.
Cool. I might sit in and listen anyways.
I could give you an opinion now, but I think it's probably more productive for me to put that opinion on GitHub where other runtime spec maintainers will see it because, you know, I'm flying solo today. So
Awesome. Well, thanks for taking a look.
You bet. And thanks for joining in, James. All right, next up on here, trying to figure out from this, things have been moving around on the list here. Is the containerd security issue something under errands, or is that something different?
This was just a small thing I wanted to bring up before we got into the main event, which was like containerd had this issue where very large config blobs could cause a denial of service. And that seemed like the kind of thing that OCI could specify is not expected, or maybe we can't say that they should never be over a certain size, but we can say clients may reject them, registries may reject them, etc. We've done this in the past with manifests. It doesn't have to be a big topic. I was just wondering if anybody had feedback on it. If I sent a PR with the same language that we use for limiting manifest size, would that be welcome?
So where is this exhaustion happening? Because we've got the limit now on manifests. Is this for pulling in layers?
For configs. So containerd will also pull the config, and you know, because it needs to, and explode when it's, you know, 1,000 gigabytes or something. So
And
yeah.
it would know that ahead of time because it's got the descriptor, right?
Right. Yeah.
Seems fair enough to me to add that language. I don't object to that.
Okay. I'll send a PR to start the discussion.
Why are we? This is maddening to me. We're gonna put a limit on the size of blobs that will affect artifacts too.
The size of the config, not the blob. The
No,
config JSON. We've got
Yeah.
a limit today
there's a
on the
blob.
manifest JSON.
Let me, before it gets too funny, the specific change I would request is if the artifact type, if the config media type is OCI config, which specifies that this is an image and not a random artifact, then the config blob we can argue about it, should be less than some size. We can argue about that too. This does not affect artifacts, uppercase or lowercase artifacts. If you define your own artifact type of cat pictures, you are welcome to stuff terabytes of cat pictures into your config or into the layers or anywhere you want.
And it doesn't affect layers that might have a huge blob on there as well.
Right.
It does affect artifacts because per the thread in the CNCF Slack, some artifacts use a config media type that is image manifest art config, and this is exactly the issue I describe in the next set of bullet points about collapsing artifacts into images. You mentioned, Brandon, your concern about air-gapped and regulated environments where updates occur very slowly. Well, if we go ahead with this using a approach of injecting artifacts into image manifests, you're going to have legacy containerd clients that do not know to do this special casing logic for if the config media type is this, then permit the size to be this or that. That's just not going to exist in your air-gapped environment. We are, again, engaging in type confusion. Legacy clients are not going to understand these new rules that we're codifying in OCI 1.1, and they're going to misbehave. And we're forcing that on those clients.
Yeah, I gotta agree with Aaron here. I don't think this is something that we need to restrict in the specification. I think it would be fair to say that, you know, a registry and or client may have limits, but the configurable limits would be fine, I think.
That's, for the record, that's more or less the language we have for manifest image sizes, which is, you know, right, a registry can accept whatever a registry expects or accepts, and a client can produce whatever it produces. But we wanted to have some general guideline for what is a reasonable thing to be expected to be portable.
Right.
I'm fine also not specifying. For the record, I really didn't think this would be this much of a topic. I'm fine just saying, like, you know, container D fix container D. Future runtimes will fix future runtimes issues. If this is an issue, you know, that's on you. I'm also fine totally just leaving it as a thing. I just thought it was interesting given our previous discussions about manifest size limits.
I think it helps portability for images if the image producer knows that they shouldn't put 5,000 labels on an image and try to ship that off and load that onto a container D that will eventually refuse it. And so having it in the spec that says, here's a limit that runtimes are probably going to enforce on you if you try to do it, that's helpful to me.
And we do have a limit on the labels. So
we have it on individual labels, but do we have it on
the list,
collection?
the size of the list can't exceed a certain amount.
That's also on
I'm
annotations.
sorry,
I
in
think.
container D, I meant. We've got a
In
limit.
container D.
Yeah,
Yeah.
not
And is that label or annotation?
yes, I believe both.
In any case, my general idea was container D has set this set of limits on their own. Potentially, we should give a suggestion, a may, a can, it would be super nice if you could to have everybody align on this. But if that's controversial at all, I will retract.
I think if the restriction was on the registry side, then we would need to know what the appropriate error code would be on the push.
Sure.
I
don't want to detract more from the main event. I'm gonna go off and do write a PR for this, and we can argue there about that, and then I will we'll argue about it for a few weeks, and then I'll close it. Let's get back to the good stuff.
My preferred word for that one, Jason, when you write it up, is should.
Oh, I was going May. I'm in Mayland now.
I'm thinking May.
I think.
And if they do, then it should be configurable, I think, you know, but that's.
Given that limit is a container D or client side limit, I think having input from the container D maintainers would be the best way to get this ironed out, right? And it's only for the config JSON. It doesn't matter about the blob or anything like that. And it's clearly a client side implementation more than anything else, right?
Yeah, I guess unlike manifest, it's more like the config is totally opaque. The registry doesn't care about what's in the config. Unlike manifests, where the registry does need to like have an agreement about the general size. I think the more and more we talk about this, the less I'm convinced we need a change at all, and which is great, which is exactly the direction things should go. Thanks, everyone.
All right, so I think the next up there is that Aaron.
Yeah, I feel like I don't need to expand much on this. I looked at the history of CVEs filed against container runtimes, registries, and the clients, and even in the relatively short time frame that OCI 1.0 has been standardized, there's been a few type confusion vulnerabilities, one which resulted in an RCE, one resulted in a crash in the Docker client. And I think that while it is possible to standardize this sort of fallback for artifacts, I just think that we're going down a path that will result in CVEs being discovered in client-side tooling that will be found for years after this. There are a large number of clients that assume image manifests contain image configs and image layers, and it is definitely a fair point that those assumptions should not be, clients should validate before they parse, and they should not use memory unsafe parsers and things like this. Like this is sort of standard security practice, but standardizing using image manifests for artifacts just blows the doors wide open in terms of the varieties of new arbitrary content that clients that were written prior to this standardization will have to handle. And to the points that Brandon has raised and others, is we have clients that might not be updated for years. We might have regulated environments, air-gapped environments, and so on. That is my concern. It's the last sort of objection that I'm going to raise to this approach. And I'll leave it to the floor and the voting maintainers.
We unfortunately don't have John or Vincent, who had the most set of remarks and comments on both the PRs. How do folks want to proceed on this? I think it's coming to a point of no passer, right? Like we're not making a decision either way, not getting out of this logjam. It's indirectly, like I kind of echo what Brandon said, which is it's hurting others in how we can make progress. A lot of people are depending on some aspects, and to me, we had an implementation in Docker Hub that worked, and then now they even yanked out the capability to push in subjects. So it's a step back. I think that's what I'm more concerned about. So how can we get out of this and agree on something? But we can't do this when people who actually had the most comments on the issue are not here. Last week we couldn't kind of get insight into 999. Vincent made a few comments as well, and this week also we can't. So how do we want to proceed? Is John or Vincent able to join the call? Jason, go ahead.
I'd love to hear from other image spec maintainers that have not had any input at all, right? There are a number of image spec maintainers. This is the constant issue in OCI, is that we 3 or 4 of us always argue about a tiny thing, and then we need the adults to come step in and actually vote on which of us has made the better argument. I'd like to just try to do that now. If we could get, I don't know how to get their attention. I don't know what to do to get them to care about image spec that they are a maintainer for, but it would be excellent to have their feedback and input. Otherwise, we're going to keep arguing, and then we're going to come up with our, like the 5 of us agree, and then image spec maintainers are going to show up and say, oh, but we disagree. And now we're back to like square one. Sorry, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so two things here, right? One, we ran into this problem years back for this call, that we would try to make decisions here, right? And that didn't work very well because, as you're saying, right, we couldn't get the right people on this call every week. So I think from that perspective, the idea of the work group came along for a very good reason, right? So that you could get a smaller group of people that were going to be intensely, right, focused on that, and then they would get the input that they need from their maintainers. You might need to reopen the work group for some of these issues, even if it's just temporarily for a couple of months.
That's months.
It might take that long, right?
I think reopening the work group, I'm making air quotes, but you can't see them. Reopening the work group is sort of a formality. The contents of the work group are the 4 or 5 or 6 of us that are already here arguing about it. So if image spec maintainers need the work group to be officially unsealed and resumed, then that would be a step we should take. But I'd rather avoid it. Does somebody have
Mostly,
any-
I'm just saying, you need a special call to discuss these things, so we can start.
Okay.
working. You can work
there-
on
is there-
issues.
Is there OCI
fine.
precedent for getting that call? Like, do we have a bat signal? Do we have an OCI signal for come and approve a PR, please, image spec maintainers? I'll send them money.
You
Give them a
basically
20. I'll do it.
you separate the call out into two parts, right? With the second half being a focus discussion, and then make sure we get the invites in email and, Slack it out and make sure that they come, right? And
Yeah.
if they don't, we got to go talk to them, right? To make sure we get all the right input. The things that Aaron is mentioning are correct, right? I'd like to point out to him, though, that we're already using it for those other purposes. So we're already actually seeing some of those kinds of security issues coming up. For example, the CVE that was pointed at the top, right? So we do need to think about it, consider the security issues, maybe slow down just a little bit, just to beat on it, right? And review it from a deep view of we're changing the work group's output, right? Just saying.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So if
Well, all
nobody
right.
has
I guess
anything
if
on
there's
that
nothing
one,
left to discuss, what are we here for? What do we all come here to talk about if it's just the same thing and then image spec maintainers don't do anything? Maybe you're totally right. I hear what you're saying. We should go bug them to actually take a look and see. what they
Yeah,
think.
I'm not saying we shouldn't discuss things. I'm just saying, don't expect the vote to happen here. Because
Sure.
if it does, it's an isolated vote with a limited scope of people.
Right.
That was the only part that we tried to stay away from. It's perfectly fine to discuss issues and try to, drill down on some of the PRs, pull them down, and to expose others, right, on a weekly basis to what's going on. I'm not saying don't do that. Just this isn't the work group, right? Not totally, unless all are in attendance.
Well, the work group has the same problem, right? The work group met for months and came to a conclusion that we edited, that we modified. But then even if we had all agreed on that day to that thing, we would have had to spend weeks, months, who knows, wrangling image spec maintainers.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna
It's not easy. It's not,
Yeah.
especially when you're a leading spec as opposed to a trailing spec. It makes it
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah.
But it's important. Let's not do artifacts. Okay.
yeah, like
Aaron,
from,
if there's additional language you'd like to propose to the specification and over in the distribution API, to restrict or security issues or to discuss those, we would certainly be willing to accept additional, PRs there if you got some ideas.
I think, unfortunately, were I to propose sort of an answer to this type confusion issue, the nature of that answer, the nature of that proposal would be to
Just don't do
restrict
it.
the
Yeah.
artifacts to a well-defined set, and I think that's, I think that goes against the charter of the organization, right? Is not to act as a gatekeeper, I think, is language I saw elsewhere.
Yeah, I think we don't want to restrict the set, but we did have the concept and the thought, right, that we would at least look at the ones that are being proposed and used, review them, make sure that they've got these kinds of limits, right? That they're not just exposing some random format that can be, is taken advantage of by the clients or on the registry. That's worth it's very, very much worth the discussion here. Brandon, did you guys discuss?
Lucky has his head up.
Thanks, Lucky. Thanks, Phil.
No worries, Mike. No worries, Mike. Can we say right now that we've had a concerted effort to solicit the image spec maintainers and actually bring them to the floor? Because I'd be willing to go do that. I think just, in previous experiences, especially with the image spec, it was a very directed, concerted effort where we had to reach out and actually go and get each of the maintainers and say, okay, we feel like we've had a bunch of conversation. Can you come and help us make this decision? I know there was something that Josh put on the mailing list, but I've also seen them kind of just, in my experience with image spec maintainers specifically, it was a very directed set of questions that either we'd have to call a meeting or say, we need you to look at this right now. I can't say right now that I feel like we've had a directed effort, and I'd be willing to go do that. I don't know. Again, it comes back to how Jason said, how do we get the bat signal up here? Because it seems like we've all gone around and round. So let's go and have the image spec maintainers come and give us their opinion. I know some of them are here. Jason, I'll pass it to you.
So 3 weeks ago on issue 999, I added image spec maintainers, which I believe emails them or GitHub notifies them in some way. And we've gotten nothing, no new feedback from them in 3 weeks. I think the most actionable thing, to your point about making it as clear and direct a question as possible. If I was a lax image spec maintainer from 6 years ago and someone told me to read issue 999 with no context, I would rightfully not do that. I would ask for, what is the question? Yes, no. What is the question? I can answer as easily as possible. To that effect, can we merge 999 and whatever other ancillary related changes we have with the image spec maintainers we have on board? And then the question we have for image spec maintainers is, do you approve of the release as currently at head? Like now we have a spec at head that you can read and diff since 1.0. And that change is a little bit easier to ingest than all the discussion on all of the issues that link to 20 other issues. That way it's, here is the thing we are asking you to approve. You approve or don't. I think that process will still take a month, but at least it's only a month and it's a clear up and down question as opposed to weigh in on our arguments. Does anyone feel differently?
No, that's valid. I would ask, did Stephen Day take a look at this in detail yet, and or Alexa? It's all right.
I don't know. I have no indication that they have, but that doesn't mean that they haven't.
Okay. Maybe some confirmation on that would help a lot.
Brandon, go ahead.
If you guys need help, we can go get these guys, right, and get them involved, give them a little education on it, and try to help them get a review done. Alexa on the security stuff, and Stephen Day specifically on the architectural change that we made and proposing with 999.
For me, before we start pulling in other maintainers for a vote on this, and engaging them to read through a 100 comment thread, I think it's safe to say that there's enough dissension in there that we wouldn't be able to get another release candidate out the door or a release out the door with Artifact in there. And so I thought we had agreed last week that 999 would eventually go once we finished up some of the other changes we were looking at in image spec. And so I've got those listed down as the next bullet point in the discussion here. But does it make sense to go ahead and look at those other agenda items we want to look at? Move forward with that, because I hate to see us continuously go through in the same circle over and over again every single week of going back. Do we want to discuss 999 again when we know that I think we've discussed it like I was saying last time. So I think the next agenda items that we had on there was to say, hey, what other changes to image spec do we want to have in there so that if we do, and assuming we do merge 999, we've got something to fall back on.
That sounds fine to me. I think let's tackle those other issues that we wanted to tackle before 999, and then how about I propose this as a way to unblock. We address those ancillary issues and look into what we need to do to make sure Artifact is a viable baseline, lowercase a artifact. Merge 999. It does have approval, I think, in order to merge, or maybe I don't know what the rules are with the GitHub pull request, but merge 999. And if it works better for the maintainers, I am fine writing a pull request, essentially reverting 999 and making this case, and just having the maintainers review. I think it's likely the case that the consensus is against Artifact Manifest, but I also think that moving forward with 1.1 with no definition for artifacts at all of any sort will hurt end users. So I want to make sure that we do that.
What I've seen is there is consensus amongst a fair number of maintainers that we can work on Artifact Manifest. It's just going to be something that's done with more than what's in there right now. They don't want to see it just limited to what it currently is. So it would be a change to what's there, and that there is an acceptance that could happen inside of a branch. So I've seen that so far, and I think we've got enough consensus there to move forward with that. Doesn't mean it's going to merge in tomorrow. This could take months, probably will take months knowing us, but there is that path forward for Artifact of there will eventually be an Artifact Manifest. It's just not going to be in the next in 1.1 from what I'm hearing. All right, so if there are no objections on that, there are 3 different PRs linked in the notes, 1023, 1029, and 1030. I had originally left 1029 as a draft, hoping the VBATs would go through in 1023 and either say, no, we'll go with 1029, or we'll pull in my changes into 1023. And I was fine either way. I haven't seen anything from VBATs in a little bit on this one. So I went ahead and took mine out of draft state. So if anybody wants to look at that and give that a thumbs up, they're welcome to. If you want to give the thumbs up to VBATs, you're welcome to do as well. And 1030 is that I believe is Aaron's. And I think all 3 of these are hitting the same code base. And so we need to look and figure out a direction and approve at least one of them. And then if we want to approve multiple of them, we might have to go through after the fact and do some kind of merge conflict resolution there at that point. But I want to put up there, I don't think it's something that we can do on the call today. I think people are going to need to sit down and spend some time actually reading through these, but I think that would be a good path forward, is to look through each one of those and sort out which way they want to go on that one and what they want to approve. Discussion, thoughts, concerns? Stunned silence. If nobody has anything on that one, I can throw out stuff that might be a little more objectionable. Let's see. There was a request on the OCI mailing list to get rid of conformance test for blob delete. And I was wondering if we want to consider that before the 1.1, knowing that'll be the next conformance test we push out that people want to look at. I would understand concerns on getting rid of that from conformance because blob delete is kind of part of the spec. But I would also understand that people would say, you know, none of our code anywhere ever calls that API in a normal situation. It's only a conformance test that ever tests that API. Do other folks there feel strongly about that one?
I guess I would wonder what the intent of the blob delete API was. Was it like a security thing, or
I think
was
it was
the
a
intention?
carry forward from Docker's version of the spec, and I don't think Docker was even calling it. I see
Yes.
Mike nodding.
Probably just
Well-
completeness in designing the spec. Yep, we're designing a CRUD API, so we have all the standard operations for CRUD.
That's right, Tina.
Including delete.
It was about CRUD. But you depending on the registry implementation, though, certain registries do have an additional API above and beyond just the push pull that we have, and they do in that additional API support the ability to delete stuff. I think it's a tough one. You don't really need it in the distribution API, but it's expected in all clients.
The delete for the manifest is useful. The delete of the blob is dangerous. And so most clients never touch that because they don't know what other manifests that they aren't looking at right then could potentially point to that same blob.
True. They usually delete my
Leave it.
image. They expect the registry to take care of the rest.
Yeah. Leave that up for the garbage collector.
Yeah.
And I think that's why Jake
At the
Florek
same
is
time,
asking for
at the
that.
same time, if I've got some private data, maybe I need to delete that data, and I need to make sure it was doable. So, like you're right, it requires additional client tooling. I'm remembering why it was put in there, and yes, as TNN said, it was done for completeness.
I think the request there was at least make it optional. Make it behind a flag. And so does that make sense to adjust the conformance test to just at least put a flag in there that you could option that off? And would someone still be OCI conformant without that in there? At least as conformant as we do in our conformance test, because you can be conformant without a tag listing API as long as you say don't run that test.
I'll take a look at it from my side.
I don't know if I have the least confrontational things or if everybody is just I'm chilling everybody out with the monotone voice there. Let's see. I'll keep moving forward, but that one was on our email, so it's a good one to look at. And yeah, Aaron, for your comment there, 1029, 1030, 1023, I think they're each, we're all hitting the same area of the code base. Let's see here. JSON schema, that's a quick one. If folks want to look at that, I changed everything HTTPS, but if you look at JSON schema, that actual schema term there is not just a URL. It's also a fixed string that matches something upstream in the spec. And so it needs to stay HTTP. So my change there was not great and needs to be reverted. And this is sat out there for long enough. So hopefully someone has the time to go through and look at that and say thumbs up to that. So that was issue 931.
Brandon, I've done this before. Do you want to just PR on top of 1023 and try to ping VBATs to just get them merged as one? Or do you want to get yours approved? Which way do you want to go? I'm okay either way. Because I think the intent is the same, right?
Are you asking 1029, 1023?
Yeah.
Or are you asking something else?
No, 1029 and 1030, I think. Oh, 1029, 1023, yes.
Yeah, I pinged VBATs and said, hey, I'm just going to throw mine as a draft because I got too much content there to try to figure out and put up there. And then I didn't see anything else from VBATs when he saw that.
Okay.
I think it just means he hasn't had time.
Makes sense.
And I'm fine either way. If people say, let's merge what VBATs put up there and then I can put mine as a separate PR after the fact, that's fine with me. As long as we have some kind of forward progress here.
I think that while these PRs have potential merge conflicts, I think that most of them look like they're pretty easily resolved. I just looked at diffing the three or trying to do a merge on all three of them. I think we could probably just go in sort of a sequence. I think 1023 just defines well, 1023 and 1029 both sort of define scratch, and I think that just needs to be resolved. But 1029 adds guidelines for artifacts, and 1030 changes ignore language so that it's clearer that implementations have different required behavior when encountering unknown media types.
Yeah, the do not err language that was in 1030, I think that was the word you used there. That looked good to me. And then I think you're trying to merge that together with some other stuff around the config media type, and that's where we started running into the same space.
Happy to rebase my PR after we address the order of operations here. I think
Yeah,
it doesn't need to go first.
Either that, or if it's possible to split, because you originally had that as a separate PR for 1030 of saying a lot of the language around do not fail or do not err. It might make sense to look at that as two separate things.
Yeah, I think that if we merge your two PRs, I think I'll need to rebase, and actually I would just end up removing some of the language that's in mine. But I think it just makes sense to merge those first, and before I attempt to create a hypothetical PR, which might still have a git diff.
Yep. Sounds good. The only other thing I'm going to pull in there was distribution spec had issue 374, or yeah, that was issue. They're running into issues on their conformance test because they have a minimum size for a chunked upload. And so if you do a chunked upload with something too small, it fails on their back end just because the S3 backend, I think, that they're pushing to or something back there had a minimum size that they were trying to push those chunks to. Does it make sense to add some kind of header in there of saying, here's my minimum chunk size, and then have that responded back to us when you do the initial, which is it? There's a call in there, the post call that we do in the very beginning that says we want to start uploading a chunk, to have that come back in the response, and the client, if it sees that, will know that I should at least try to make my chunks at least this big. And if I'm smaller than that, then I should go ahead and just merge it onto one chunk. I suspect this one's going to have less interactions because I might be the only one here that does chunked uploads.
I don't think you are. And yeah, there's an issue here. Is there a pull request
There
with a
is
proposal?
not.
Okay.
It's been sitting out for a long while, but it was just the issue saying, hey, please fix this because the conformance tests are breaking.
Yeah, I don't see any language that restricts that sort of thing, so we should be able to add it.
Yeah, it would be a extra header coming back to the client, and the client hopefully responds to that in kind. And if they don't, you just get a failed upload. Nothing we can do, but we've at least got the response codes from that one that you would see that failed upload.
Right.
But otherwise, the two can be a little bit more cooperative with each other. I know from my side, the biggest concern I have is if I make the size of the chunk too large, I store that in memory. And so I would worry about memory exhaustion on the client.
A minimum chunk size seems kind of weird to me. Wouldn't there
Apparently
be
it comes from S3.
wouldn't there be a maximum chunk size? Because if there's a minimum chunk size, that means I can't upload blobs that are below a certain size using the chunked upload API.
The final chunk can always be below.
Oh, okay.
It's just
But-
the intermediate ones. Yeah.
If the final chunk can be below, then what do they gain by setting a limit on the other chunks?
It's something with the S3 API. I'd have to go digging into the AWS documentation for that one, but
Okay.
they don't want you
Legal-
pushing up things in like a, 2 kilobyte chunk at a time kind of deal.
I believe it's to mitigate something like a slow Loris style attack where you send chunks of 1 byte each. It causes a lot of processing on the end server to reconstitute those.
Why is this a distribution spec issue? Like, who is it? Because clients cannot determine the chunk size that it needs to send because of a backend driver implementation?
Clients don't know what the server needs on its side. And so they're asking for distribution spec to throw a header in there of where the server informs the client that you need to make your chunks at least this large.
It's just conformance, AJ.
Yeah, probably highlighted by the conformance tests that
It
probably
was.
test this API with a very small chunk size because that's way easier to test.
That's what I did, and that's what broke their environment.
Bingo. So this is just add some environment variables so that you can run the bucket,
They were originally asking for an environment variable, but I said that's not good enough for me because me as a client doesn't know what the environment variable is on your conformance test. And so the thing we came back to was, what if we have a header that comes back on that put that initiates the chunked upload?
I see.
And when the client sees that header, the client can parse that header and respond in kind.
Okay.
Does S3 return a similar header? I don't know enough about it, just asking.
I was looking to see if they've got something, and apparently they don't. But it's, this is our API back to the client. So
Yeah,
we're
if
always
you're
free to
adding
add
it-
things.
If you're going to change the test case, you probably have to add something to the spec, Brandon.
Yeah, well, this is where I was looking to not change the test case so much, but to change the specs so that any client can work on it, not just the conformance test.
Right. That's what I mean. Yeah.
As a client author, your client has this problem too that was
does.
highlighted by the conformance tests.
It does, yes.
So you'd like to clarify in the spec what your client should be doing here.
Yep. And just for clarity, my client does not upload chunked by default. It's a fallback if the full upload fails. Because chunked uploads are notoriously troublesome.
So just ping on the language that you want to add. We'll take a look at it. Sounds cool.
Yeah. Well, I figure before we open up a PR, if people are comfortable adding another header in there, if that sounds good, I'll go ahead and get a PR with that one.
As long as it's
opened up.
not required, right? To be able to extend.
None of this, it's all informational. None of it's required. And if you ignore the header as a client, then the most that might happen is your upload fails. But chunk uploads already are notoriously troublesome. So very possible something's going to fail anyway.
Could take an alternative like we did for the manifest size and just figure out, like, we did some research on what a reasonable minimum was that we could set as a recommended, hey, if you want to enforce a limit, this is the limit that you should make sure you support. An
Suggested
alternative
limit.
could be just saying in the spec, you should have your chunk size be at least this or whatever. Or you should support registries that have a minimum of at least this, something like that.
And then if here would be the page header, it makes sense.
Yeah, I would lean towards having that because technically speaking, even if the backend driver for distribution or something else implements smaller or larger chunk sizes, rechunking can happen and the uploads can actually happen through, right? There's no reason for registry to actually honor a minimum or a maximum, because each of those drivers independently implement the chunked upload. So what I'm trying to understand is the client failing because the underlying implementation doesn't handle these cases, or is it because
Our conformance is less than a megabyte. It was only sending.
Yeah, it was the comment I see at the very first, very top of the issue was a 5 megabyte, except for the last chunk, whatever that last chunk is.
right?
And so if we start pushing 2 chunks and they're both less than the 5 megabyte limit, then it's going to fail this upload. And that's because they weren't doing it in the registry server. They just passed directly off to the S3 backend, and the S3 was throwing that error.
So shouldn't that implementation fix it?
For that implementation to fix it, I think that means they have to hold the chunk in memory, right? Or in some kind of temporary cache.
Right. And that's the limitation of that implementation, not the limitation of the specification, right? That's kind of what I'm trying to get to. Like,
Well, there's 2 different things, Ajay. One is that we've got a conformance test that's being more aggressive than the spec.
No,
oh,
the spec doesn't say what to do. The spec just says, here's how you do it. It doesn't say that
Right.
we're not aggressive or not aggressive. It's just we're small.
Yeah, just small. Wasn't anticipated, so that it would fail.
But there's nothing in the spec that says you have to be a certain size. If I want to upload chunks of
Exactly.
a half meg, that's following the spec.
Yep. An unintended failure occurred.
yeah, I mean, I'm more in favor of kind of like giving guidance rather than having a header, just to avoid. And if the guidance doesn't work, then maybe we can move to a header.
Yeah, that's sort of the thing, right? They're trying to run the conformance against their registry, and it's failing in this case. So they're asking for a switch to modify the conformance to make it pass which we've done for prior other registries, allowed them to configure what they needed to get it to run correctly, right? So long as the specification did not have a restriction against that configuration.
Yeah, my concern if we make it a configuration in the conformance test is that as a client writer, I don't know what that registry is configured to. So there's no feedback to me to understand what I should be doing.
We should be publishing that in a table, right?
But I don't want to load a table into my client to look up a registry against some table.
Right. Pros and cons.
And hope that you can detect the right registry implementation. Like,
yeah.
Or the alternative, you push it on the users, and now the users have to specify the exact chunk size on like Docker push. That's kind of obscene.
I have the flags there, but I like to set sensible defaults so the users don't even have to think about that stuff. So if we put guidance, I would adjust mine to just follow all our guidance, and that would work. But the nice thing about throwing a header in there is that the header just gives back that feedback so that we don't have to put in the spec at all. It's just passed back to the client of, hey, this is what you need to be above. What's your thoughts on that one, Sajay, of the fear of having a header versus guidance?
I was just following precedence for manifest. We did not publish the max manifest size as a header. Why would we do that for chunk size specifically?
The one thing we got in the chunk API that we don't have with the manifest is when you upload a manifest, you just send it. The registry has no option at that point to tell you anything before you send it. You're just uploading at that point. With the chunked upload, there is that initial post request that says, give me the URL. I need to start doing my chunked uploads too. And so you do have a response back from the server at that point that they can pass additional data in.
Yes, you do end up sending the first chunk though, to get this, right? Or is
no,
it
the initial post, you're just requesting the URL.
That's the API, right?
The initial post, you're just getting the URL. You're not pushing a chunk at that point.
Okay. And that's a header that the clients can use, and they'll have to remember that going forward, right?
they would have to put that into the client side code. And like I say, if the client doesn't do that, then worst case, the chunked upload fails. And that's already in the spec today of, hey, you're going to get back a return code that says, sorry, too bad, I don't accept it.
Yeah, I don't have any concerns.
Cool.
I think getting input from other folks who actually run the registry, maybe Michael can chime in, but I don't have any concerns.
Saying AWS Michael Brown. That's when you put someone on the spot to see if he
Question?
wants to come off mute.
They can come
Yeah,
up.
have you been following what we've been going on?
No.
So we are looking at distribution spec 374. I'll drop the link over here.
Yeah, sorry, a little bit.
Yeah. The
question?
374, we're looking at a chunked upload. And if you push a chunk that's too small, the backend S3 API comes back and says that your chunk is too small, so you can't push that, worrying about various attack scenarios against an S3 API. And so we're looking at, in the initial post that you request, it says, hey, I want to do a chunked upload, to allow the registry server to say, yeah, you can do the upload to this URL. And oh, by the way, here is a header that says the minimum size you need to be above for each one of your chunks. Because otherwise we are breaking their conformance test because we push really small chunks in the conformance test.
Right.
Is that something that seems reasonable to add on your side of knowing, hey, here's my backend, I can just add an extra header here in the post? Or possibly you don't even care because you don't have a minimum.
I think we use S3 and are somewhat limited by the same
So you might have the 5 meg limit as well.
same limits that other implementations get. I would have to think about it. I definitely think, I think it would be something we shouldn't just say every, a header makes sense here probably, or some way for the registry to specify what their minimum is.
That's what we're looking at. It's just on the post that says I'm getting ready to do a chunked upload, and you just get back a header in that post response.
Yeah, we could add that. Jamie's been looking at stuff like this as well recently. I don't know if he has any thoughts.
You'd also, while we're waiting for him to come off mute, give the conformance test a try, the latest version on the main branch against AWS, and see if it throws an error for you because we push really small chunks.
Yeah, we can do that.
And I see Saeed on Quay chiming in there saying +1 to that as well. I'll get working on a PR on that one. And if folks plus minus either way, feel free to intercept me before I get that submitted, and we can always change it. Otherwise, I'll get something for us to look at for the next time.
I think both Michael Brown and I am not maintainers on distribution spec. So our thumbs up are just.
As long as the registry maintainers aren't screaming that they're going to come after me on the next time we have an in-person meeting, I'm happy.
I can't speak for the distribution spec maintainers, but as a runtime spec maintainer, it makes me feel better about runtime spec changes when the runtime authors are thumbs upping it. When there's a thumbs up saying, yes, I do agree with this spec change and I do plan to implement it in my runtime. Knowing that registry authors are on board with the change is probably helpful for distribution spec maintainers.
All right.
No,
Just like that, we went through a whole nother hour. So
Brad, I like your
So-
pattern on that. I think the recommendation though is going to be both to allow for a configuration for conformance for legacy versions of S3. And also your suggested, changes to the spec. We can look at both.
okay. We can go forward with that. All right. Till next week. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers, man.
All righty.
Thanks.